Max Verstappen's engine just failed in China. But that is not the real story. Because what happened inside the RB22 during the final laps of the Chinese Grand Prix could expose a much bigger problem for Red Bull and the brand new Ford engine project. Only hours ago, Verstappen was running inside the top 6, fighting through traffic, salvaging points from a difficult weekend. Then suddenly, power dropped. The radio message came through: bring the car back, retire immediately, race over. And while Mercedes celebrated a dominant 1-2 finish with Antonelli and Russell, Red Bull walked away from Shanghai with 0 points from their lead driver. But here is the detail that makes this situation far more serious than a simple retirement. This failure happened in the second race of the brand new regulation era. The same era where Red Bull's future engine program, backed by Ford, is supposed to define the next decade of Formula One. And suddenly, questions are everywhere. Is the RB22 unstable? Is the power unit reliable? And more importantly, did the Chinese Grand Prix just reveal the first real crack in Red Bull's new project? Because what Verstappen said after the race may be even more explosive than the retirement itself. And once you hear it, the entire situation inside Red Bull starts to look very different. Before we break this down, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Because this Formula One season is already delivering stories nobody expected. Something strange happened in Shanghai. Not just a retirement. Not just a bad race. Something that, if you look closely, could reveal a much deeper problem inside Red Bull. Because only a few hours ago, after the Chinese Grand Prix of the 2026 season ended, a completely different story started to emerge around Max Verstappen, the RB22, and the brand new Ford-powered project that was supposed to lead the next era of Formula One. And what happened in China may be the first real warning sign that this project is not going the way Red Bull expected. But to understand why this is becoming such a massive talking point across the paddock tonight, we need to go back to the beginning of the weekend. Because the problems did not start with the retirement. They started much earlier. And almost nobody noticed at first. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Because this season is already delivering storylines nobody predicted. The Chinese Grand Prix was supposed to be a reset for Red Bull. Australia had already shown that the new era of Formula One was going to look very different. Mercedes suddenly looked incredibly strong. Ferrari looked competitive again. And Red Bull, the team that dominated the previous generation of cars, suddenly looked uncertain. Shanghai was expected to give answers. Instead, it created even more questions. From the first practice sessions, something about the RB22 did not look comfortable. The car did not appear unstable in a dramatic way. But it also did not look planted. Through the fast sequence in the middle sector, the rear of the car moved more than Verstappen likes. The entry into slower corners required extra corrections. And on traction zones, the RB22 simply did not launch forward the way the old Red Bulls used to. That alone was already surprising. But what really started worrying people inside the paddock was the pace comparison. Because while Red Bull struggled to find a consistent window, Mercedes looked almost effortless. George Russell was quick. But the biggest shock was Kimi Antonelli. The rookie drove with the calm of a veteran and ended up taking pole position for the Grand Prix. And suddenly the narrative of the weekend shifted. Mercedes was no longer just competitive. They looked like the reference car of the grid. But that was only part of the story. Because inside the Red Bull garage, the focus was somewhere else entirely. The engine. The new power unit partnership that will eventually evolve into the full Ford-backed Red Bull engine project has been one of the biggest technical stories of the new regulation cycle. For months, Red Bull insisted that the integration between the chassis and the hybrid system would be one of their strongest advantages. But in China, subtle signs suggested that something was not working perfectly. Energy deployment did not always look consistent down the long Shanghai straight. And on several laps, Verstappen appeared to lose speed right at the end of the straight. Small details. But in modern Formula One, small details often reveal bigger issues. Still, despite the awkward feeling with the car, Verstappen managed to fight his way into the race. Qualifying was not spectacular. But it was solid enough to keep him in the mix for points. And for a moment, it looked like the Dutch champion might still salvage a decent result from a difficult weekend. Then the race began. And immediately things became complicated. The start was not clean. While cars around him launched aggressively, the RB22 struggled slightly off the line. Within seconds, Verstappen lost positions and found himself trapped in heavy midfield traffic. And that created another problem. Dirty air. With the 2026 cars already heavier and more complex to manage, following other cars closely is much harder than before. Verstappen spent the opening phase of the race fighting just to move forward through the field. Not attacking the podium. Not fighting Mercedes or Ferrari. Simply trying to recover positions. Lap after lap, he slowly climbed back into the points. It was not spectacular, but it was controlled. Classic damage limitation. By the middle phase of the race, he had managed to reach the top 6. And that is when something unexpected started to happen. The pace stabilized. The tire management improved. And suddenly it looked like Verstappen might actually bring the RB22 home with a respectable result. Nothing extraordinary, but important points. Then, with roughly 10 laps remaining, everything changed. Over the radio, Verstappen reported something unusual. A loss of power. At first it sounded minor. But only moments later, the message from the pit wall came through. Bring the car back. Retire the car. The RB22 had a power unit issue. And just like that, Verstappen's race was over. No dramatic crash. No strategy gamble gone wrong. Just a sudden technical failure. And that retirement instantly became one of the biggest talking points of the entire weekend. Because when the race finished, the contrast between teams was impossible to ignore. Mercedes dominated the event. Antonelli controlled the race from the front. Russell secured second place. A perfect 1-2 finish. Ferrari placed Lewis Hamilton on the podium. Meanwhile, Red Bull left Shanghai with 0 points from their lead driver. That alone would already be painful. But the deeper concern lies in what caused the retirement. According to early information from the team, the issue was related to a power loss within the engine system. A problem serious enough that engineers preferred to retire the car immediately to avoid further damage. Now here is where things get interesting. Because this is not just any engine era. This is the first season where the foundations of the Red Bull-Ford partnership are truly being tested under race conditions. And reliability, especially early in a regulation cycle, is everything. One failure can be dismissed as bad luck. 2 failures start a pattern. And patterns are what teams fear most. Inside the paddock tonight, several analysts are already pointing at the same question. Is the RB22 package fully ready for this new era? Or are Red Bull discovering weaknesses they did not expect? And while Verstappen was dealing with frustration in the garage, another story inside the team quietly developed on the other side of the pit wall. Isack Hadjar, the young French driver, racing alongside a 4-time world champion, entered the weekend with far less attention. But his performance in China was quietly impressive. In qualifying, he finished only about 1/10 of a second behind Verstappen. A tiny margin. Especially considering his experience level in Formula 1. During the race, Hadjar kept his race clean. No major mistakes. No dramatic incidents. Just steady driving and solid pace. While Verstappen eventually retired, Hadjar completed the race inside the top 10. And that detail matters more than it might seem. Because when a car fails for one driver but survives for the other, engineers immediately start comparing data. Telemetry. Energy deployment. Thermal management. Every variable becomes important. Did Verstappen push the system harder? Was the failure purely random? Or does the RB22 operate dangerously close to its limits when driven at maximum attack? These are the kinds of questions that engineers will spend the next several days investigating. But there is another layer to this entire story. And it involves Verstappen himself. Because after the race, his comments about the new generation of cars did not exactly sound optimistic. For months now, Verstappen has been openly critical of the 2026 regulations. He has described the cars as heavier, more complicated, and less enjoyable to drive. In earlier interviews he even suggested that these rules could harm the spectacle of Formula 1. Now, after suffering a frustrating race and a mechanical retirement in China, those comments suddenly carry even more weight. When a driver of Verstappen's caliber publicly questions the direction of the sport, people listen. Teams listen. The FIA listens. Fans definitely listen. And the timing could not be more sensitive. Because Mercedes now looks extremely strong. Ferrari appears to be closing the gap. And Red Bull, the dominant force of the previous era, suddenly looks vulnerable. But the most intriguing part of this entire situation is what might happen next. Red Bull engineers are already working on updates for the RB22. Some were originally planned for later races in the season. But after the events of Shanghai, there is growing speculation that the team may accelerate those upgrades. Changes to improve rear stability. Adjustments to energy deployment. Possibly even refinements to the cooling systems around the power unit. Because if the engine issue that forced Verstappen to retire is more than just a one-time failure, Red Bull cannot afford to wait. Not in a season where Mercedes is already scoring dominant results. And remember something important. Even during a difficult weekend, Verstappen was still fighting for 6th place before the retirement. That means the RB22 is not a slow car. But right now, it may not be a comfortable one. And comfort is crucial for a driver like Verstappen. When the rear of the car feels unstable, he loses confidence. And when Verstappen loses confidence in the rear axle, the entire performance window shrinks. So the real story coming out of China may not simply be that Verstappen retired. The real story is what that retirement might reveal about the early development direction of the Red Bull Ford project. Because Formula One seasons are long. One race never decides a championship. But sometimes, one race exposes weaknesses that shape the rest of the year. Shanghai might be exactly that moment. A race where Mercedes confirmed their dominance. A race where Ferrari quietly stayed close. And a race where Red Bull suddenly looked uncertain. The RB22 still has enormous potential. Nobody inside the paddock doubts the technical talent inside Red Bull Racing. But the early phase of a new regulation cycle can be brutal. Mistakes get amplified. Reliability becomes decisive. And momentum can change very quickly. Tonight, the biggest question echoing around the paddock is simple. Was the Chinese Grand Prix just a difficult weekend for Red Bull? Or was it the first real warning sign that the new era of Formula One is going to be much harder for them than anyone expected?